In a world where truth is often hidden behind comfort, there are certain realities about discipline, power, and human nature that most men never speak about openly. Marcus Aurelius once reminded us that the strongest battles are not fought outside, but within the mind. Today, we uncover what stays unsaid, what is avoided, and what silently shapes your destiny. These are not just ideas. They are truths that can change how you see yourself and the world forever. Self-control is the highest form of power, because it is the one force that does not depend on anything outside of you. Everything else in life can be influenced, taken, delayed, or controlled by circumstances, but self-control remains the only domain where a man becomes fully responsible for himself. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply when he wrote about mastery over the mind, because he knew that a person who cannot govern himself will always be governed by the world. In modern life, this truth has become even more relevant because distractions are louder, temptations are closer, and discipline is more difficult to maintain than ever before. Yet the paradox remains unchanged. The more control you have over yourself, the less the world can control you. Self-control begins at the moment of awareness, when a man notices that every action he takes is either building him or breaking him. There is no neutral ground. Every decision, even the smallest one, contributes to either strength or weakness. When a man eats without discipline, speaks without thinking, reacts without restraint, or follows every impulse without resistance, he slowly hands over his power piece by piece. It does not happen in one moment. It happens in repetition. 1,000 small losses of control become a life of regret, not because fate was cruel, but because consistency was absent where it mattered most. Marcus Aurelius emphasized that the mind is shaped by repetition, and what you repeat becomes your character. Self-control, therefore, is not a single act, but a continuous practice of choosing reason over impulse. A man without self-control is driven like a ship without a rudder. He moves, but not by direction. He reacts, but not by intention. He follows emotions that rise and fall like waves, never realizing that emotions are temporary signals, not permanent truths. Anger feels powerful in the moment, but it is often followed by regret. Desire feels urgent, but it often leads to emptiness once satisfied. Laziness feels comfortable, but it slowly erodes potential. Self-control is the ability to pause in that space between feeling and action, and in that pause lies freedom. Most men never learn to live in that space. They collapse it instantly, turning thought into action without reflection. That collapse is what creates chaos in life, because without reflection, action becomes random, and randomness never builds greatness. The strongest individuals are not those who never feel temptation, but those who feel it deeply and still choose discipline. There is a misconception that strength means absence of desire, but in reality, strength means the presence of control over desire. Marcus Aurelius did not suggest that emotions should be removed. He suggested they should be understood and governed. A man who understands his impulses gains leverage over them. He begins to see patterns in himself. He notices when he becomes weak, when he becomes reactive, when he starts drifting away from his principles. That awareness alone begins the transformation, because awareness is the first fracture in unconscious behavior. Self-control is also the foundation of respect. Respect from others, but more importantly, respect from oneself. When a man repeatedly breaks his own promises, even in small matters, he begins to lose trust in himself. And once self-trust is gone, external validation becomes addictive. He starts seeking approval because he no longer believes in his own word. This is how dependency forms, not through failure, but through inconsistency. A man who cannot trust himself will always look outward for confirmation. But a man who consistently keeps his word, even when no one is watching, develops a silent confidence that does not need explanation. That confidence is not loud, but it is unshakable. The world constantly tests self-control in subtle ways. It is not always about major decisions. In fact, it is usually the small moments that reveal the truth. The decision to wake up when the body wants to stay in comfort. The decision to continue working when distraction becomes appealing. The decision to remain silent when ego demands response. The decision to delay gratification when impatience insists on immediate reward. These moments appear insignificant, but they are the real battlefield. Marcus Aurelius often reflected on the idea that life is built in moments of choice, and those choices define the structure of character. A man who wins in small moments builds an internal strength that eventually becomes visible in larger challenges. Without self-control, intelligence becomes useless. Knowledge without discipline turns into wasted potential. A man can understand everything about success, strategy, and growth, but if he cannot control his habits, none of that knowledge translates into reality. This is why many people know what to do, but fail to do it. The gap between knowing and doing is self-control. It is the bridge that separates intention from execution. And most people remain stuck on the side of intention because they underestimate how powerful their impulses are. They assume motivation will carry them forward, but motivation is temporary. Self-control is structural. There is also a deeper layer to self-control that involves emotional restraint. Emotional reactions often create the illusion of urgency, but they distort perception. When a man is angry, he believes his anger is justified and necessary. When he is anxious, he believes his fear is realistic and predictive. When he is excited, he believes his impulse must be acted upon immediately. But self-control introduces distance between emotion and action. It allows a man to observe his emotional state without being consumed by it. This ability to observe without reaction is what creates stability. Stability is not the absence of emotion. It is the ability to remain steady in its presence. Marcus Aurelius often described the mind as something that must be trained like a muscle. Just as physical strength is built through resistance, mental strength is built through restraint. Every time a man resists an impulse, he strengthens his capacity for control. Every time he gives in, he weakens it. This is why discipline compounds over time. The more it is practiced, the easier it becomes. And the easier it becomes, the more natural it feels. Eventually, self-control stops feeling like effort and starts becoming identity. The absence of self-control leads to fragmentation. A fragmented man is one who lives in contradiction with himself. He wants success but avoids effort. He wants respect but acts irresponsibly. He wants growth but chooses comfort. This internal contradiction creates frustration because desire and action are misaligned. Self-control resolves that contradiction by aligning action with intention. It brings coherence to behavior, and coherence is what creates progress. Without it, energy is wasted in internal conflict. There is a quiet power in a man who is not easily moved, not because he lacks feeling, but because he has mastered response. He does not rush into decisions. He does not speak without thinking. He does not allow external pressure to dictate internal direction. This type of man becomes difficult to manipulate because he is not reactive. He operates from principle rather than impulse. Marcus Aurelius would describe such a state as being governed by reason rather than passion. Reason provides stability. Passion without control provides chaos. Self-control also changes the relationship a man has with time. Without discipline, time feels like something that slips away uncontrollably. With discipline, Time becomes structured and intentional. Hours begin to have purpose. Days begin to build direction. The future stops being an abstract hope and starts becoming a constructed reality. This transformation does not happen through external change, but through internal regulation. The ability to control oneself is ultimately the ability to control the direction of one's life. Not in a mystical sense, but in a practical sequence of choices repeated consistently. Even suffering becomes different under self-control. Instead of being overwhelmed by difficulty, a disciplined mind interprets suffering as training. Resistance becomes feedback. Failure becomes data. Pain becomes a signal for adjustment rather than collapse. This shift in interpretation changes everything. It removes victim thinking and replaces it with responsibility. Marcus Aurelius often reflected on adversity as a form of refinement, something that reveals weakness so it can be strengthened. A man without self-control sees suffering as injustice, but a man with self-control sees it as instruction. In the end, self-control is not about restriction, but about direction. It is not about limiting life, but about shaping it. Without it, a man is scattered. With it, a man becomes focused. And focus is what turns potential into reality. Every great achievement in history has been built on the ability to delay impulse in favor of long-term vision, to resist comfort in favor of growth, to choose discipline over distraction. And in that quiet decision repeated again and again lies the true foundation of power. Most men fear discipline more than failure, because discipline demands something that failure does not: consistency in discomfort. Failure is a moment, but discipline is a lifestyle. Failure happens once, but discipline happens every day, in small decisions that most people never see. Marcus Aurelius understood that human weakness is not exposed in crisis, but in routine. It is not the big events that break a man, but the small moments where he chooses comfort over effort again and again. This is why discipline becomes the dividing line between those who grow and those who remain stuck in the same cycle of potential and regret. Fear of discipline is subtle, not obvious. Most men do not openly say they are afraid of discipline, but their actions reveal it. They delay tasks, avoid structure, escape responsibility, and constantly seek easier paths. They call it relaxation, timing, or waiting for motivation, but beneath it is resistance to discomfort. Discipline always requires doing what is necessary, not what is enjoyable. And that is where the fear lies. It is not fear of punishment, but fear of surrendering comfort. Because comfort creates a false sense of safety, even when it is destroying progress silently. Marcus Aurelius often reflected on the idea that human beings are trained by their habits, not their intentions. A man can intend to be disciplined, but if his habits are weak, intention becomes meaningless. Discipline is built in repetition, not inspiration, and repetition exposes weakness immediately. A man may feel strong on day 1, motivated and determined, but by day 3 or 4, resistance appears. That resistance is not external, it is internal. It is the mind negotiating with effort, trying to find shortcuts, trying to justify delay. This negotiation is where most men lose. Failure, on the other hand, feels easier to accept because it is final. It happens, it ends, and it can be explained. A man can say he tried, he failed, and now he will try again later. But discipline does not end. It continues every single day. It does not allow excuses to survive. It forces confrontation with weakness repeatedly. That is why many men prefer the idea of trying and failing rather than committing to discipline and enduring the process. Failure allows emotional escape. Discipline removes escape entirely. The fear of discipline is also the fear of exposure. When a man commits to discipline, he begins to see himself clearly. There is no hiding behind excuses, no blaming circumstances, and no delaying responsibility. Everything becomes visible. His laziness, his inconsistency, his lack of focus, all of it becomes obvious through repeated action. This self-exposure is uncomfortable. Many men avoid discipline because they do not want to face themselves without filters. It is easier to remain in illusion than to confront reality. Marcus Aurelius emphasized self-awareness as a painful but necessary path to strength, because only truth can be improved, and discipline reveals truth without mercy. Discipline removes illusion gradually. At first, a man believes he is capable simply because he thinks about success. But discipline shifts focus from thinking to doing. It demands output, not intention. And in that shift, reality becomes undeniable. A man discovers what he is truly capable of only when he is forced to act consistently without excuses. That discovery can be uncomfortable because it often reveals gaps between identity and behavior. Many men believe they are hardworking until discipline shows otherwise. They believe they are focused until distraction proves otherwise. They believe they are strong until consistency tests otherwise. Fear of discipline is also fear of change. Discipline transforms identity over time, and identity change is uncomfortable because it requires letting go of familiar patterns. Even destructive habits feel familiar, and familiarity creates psychological comfort. A man may know his habits are harmful, yet still return to them because they are known. Discipline replaces the known with the required. It forces a man into unfamiliar territory repeatedly until growth becomes inevitable. Marcus Aurelius spoke about transformation through rational living, where a man aligns actions with purpose rather than habit. But alignment requires breaking old patterns, and breaking patterns feels like loss before it feels like gain. Many men underestimate how deeply comfort controls them. Comfort is not just physical ease, it is emotional avoidance. It is avoiding difficult conversations, avoiding accountability, avoiding long-term thinking. Discipline disrupts all of that. It interrupts emotional escape and replaces it with structure. A disciplined life does not allow endless flexibility, because too much flexibility leads to inconsistency, and inconsistency creates stagnation. This is why discipline often feels restrictive at first. It reduces options that were previously used as escape routes. But what most men fail to realize is that discipline does not remove freedom. It creates it. Without discipline, a man is controlled by impulses, emotions, and external distractions. He reacts rather than directs. He becomes dependent on feelings to decide action. If he feels good, he works. If he feels bad, he delays. That dependence is a form of weakness disguised as choice. Discipline breaks the dependency by separating action from emotion. It teaches a man to act regardless of mood, which is the foundation of real freedom. Marcus Aurelius often wrote about the importance of acting according to reason rather than desire. Desire is unstable. It changes constantly, shifting from one thing to another. Reason is stable. It provides direction even when emotions fluctuate. A man who follows discipline begins to operate from reason instead of impulse. That shift changes everything because it creates predictability in behavior, and predictable behavior leads to reliable results. Most men live unpredictably, not because life is chaotic, but because their discipline is inconsistent. Fear of discipline also comes from misunderstanding pain. Many men associate discipline with suffering, but they fail to see that lack of discipline also produces suffering, just delayed and amplified. The pain of discipline is immediate and controlled. The pain of regret is delayed and uncontrollable. Yet the mind naturally avoids immediate discomfort, even if it leads to greater future suffering. This is one of the greatest illusions human behavior falls into. Marcus Aurelius warned about this kind of misjudgment, where short-term perception overrides long-term reasoning. A disciplined life replaces regret with progress. But before progress appears, discomfort must be endured. This is where most men stop. They begin discipline but abandon it when discomfort rises. They interpret discomfort as a sign to stop, instead of recognizing it as a sign of growth. Growth always feels like resistance at first, because the body and mind resist change. That resistance is not danger, it is transition. But without understanding this, many men retreat before transformation begins. There is also a psychological weight attached to discipline that scares people. Once a man starts being disciplined, he becomes accountable to his own standards. He cannot ignore what he has started. Every skipped action becomes noticeable. Every missed routine becomes a reminder of failure to oneself. This internal accountability is heavier than external pressure. It is easier to disappoint others than to disappoint yourself repeatedly. Discipline creates internal pressure that cannot be escaped, which is why many avoid it altogether. Marcus Aurelius believed that true strength comes from governing the mind in accordance with duty, not desire. But duty requires consistency, and consistency requires rejection of distraction. Distraction is the easiest escape from discipline. In the modern world, distraction is everywhere, constantly offering relief from effort. This makes discipline even more difficult because the alternative is always available. A man must actively choose discipline while resisting constant temptation. That resistance builds mental strength, but it also reveals how weak impulse control can be when left unchecked. Most men fear discipline because it forces confrontation with their limitations. It shows them how much time they waste, how often they delay, how easily they give up. This confrontation can feel harsh, but it is necessary. Without seeing limitation, improvement is impossible. Discipline does not lie. It shows reality as it is, not as it is imagined. And reality often challenges self-image. There is also a deeper fear beneath discipline, the fear of losing excuses. As long as discipline is absent, excuses remain available. A man can always say he would have succeeded if he tried harder, if conditions were better, if timing was right. These narratives protect ego. Discipline destroys those narratives because it removes uncertainty. Once a man becomes disciplined and still fails, there is no one left to blame. This truth forces ownership, and ownership is uncomfortable for those who prefer external explanations. Discipline eventually reshapes identity, but the early stage feels like resistance against the self. It feels like forcing behavior that does not match current identity. That is why it is difficult. A man tries to act disciplined while still identifying as undisciplined. That contradiction creates friction. Over time, repeated action resolves that friction. But the initial phase requires persistence without visible reward. Marcus Aurelius emphasized patience with process, understanding that transformation is gradual and not immediate. The fear of discipline is ultimately the fear of becoming someone new. Not because the new self is worse, but because it is unfamiliar. Humans naturally resist unfamiliar identity states because they disrupt psychological stability. Even when current identity is limiting, it feels safe because it is known. Discipline challenges that safety. It asks a man to step into a version of himself that he has not yet validated through experience. That uncertainty creates hesitation. Yet every man who has achieved anything meaningful has crossed that hesitation, not through sudden change, but through repeated resistance against avoidance. Discipline is not built in moments of inspiration, but in moments of refusal. Refusal to quit, refusal to delay, refusal to surrender to comfort when effort is required. Marcus Aurelius framed this as alignment with rational nature. where a man acts according to purpose rather than impulse. Even when resistance is present,